todos en una tarde calurosa, y ya van unas cuantas. Para el IEB es un honor tener a Daniel Lacalle, prestigioso profesional de la economía, del mercado financiero, tremendamente mediático, y que digo que es un honor porque vamos a presentar su último libro, The Escape from the Central Bank Trap, un libro que desde luego creo que entra en un área muy importante a la hora de definir la manera de proceder del organismo de supervisión y regulación, el Banco Central Europeo, y creo que desde luego que va a generar un intercambio de puntos de vista muy interesante por parte de todas las personas que han acudido al aula el día de hoy por la tarde. Tiene un currículum muy intenso y muy interesante, y creo que es mi deber hacer referencia a él. Nació el año 67 en Madrid, o sea que esta es su casa, y es doctor en economía, profesor de economía global y finanzas, además de gestor de fondos de inversión. Está casado, con 3 hijos, y reside en Londres, aunque nos comentaba hace breve que 2 semanas Madrid, 1 en Londres, ¿no? Es el nuevo mix del momento actual. Es miembro del Consejo Asesor de la Fundación Rafael del Pino, sabemos todos una fundación muy importante, comisionado de la Comunidad de Madrid en Londres, y además tiene título de analista financiero internacional, el famoso CIA, Certified International Investment Analyst. Además es máster en investigación económica por la UCV y posgrado a través del programa de desarrollo activo por el IES Universidad de Navarra. Está considerado como uno de los top 20 de los economistas más influyentes del mundo en el año 2016, y además tenemos el gusto de contar con Daniel como profesor de nivel en una serie de programas, lo cual nos llena de satisfacción. A su vez, es autor de varios libros que han sido traducidos, por supuesto escritos en inglés, traducidos al chino, al portugués, y por lo tanto nos da una idea del impacto mediático e internacional de las obras que él produce. Ha vendido más de 50.000 copias y escribe de forma habitual en diferentes medios como son La Razón, Inversión. Es entrevistado y participa de forma regular en cadenas de televisión como la CNBC, la BBC, por supuesto colaboración con El Mundo, Intereconomía, 13TV, Espejo Público, La Sexta, The Commentator y The Wall Street Journal. Por lo tanto, es un honor, le damos una calurosa bienvenida, por favor, a don Daniel Lacalle.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Instituto de Estudios Bursátiles. May I say, first of all, that we have to congratulate because by attending this presentation, we have the option, the necessity to learn a lot about Daniel Lacalle, because his strong personality makes him a very specific combination. He's a market practitioner. Consequently, he has the approach of the markets, and this melting pot gives him a very special feature. I would say that congratulations is an understatement. And why do I say that? Very simply, because he makes simple what is complex, and if you allow me to use the expression, he can square the circle, because he will explain you what has happened in the last 9 years, the strength of these mighty and powerful central banks by manipulating the amount and the price of money. And he's covering certain topics which really impact the day-to-day lives of all individuals, households, companies, public agencies, and sovereigns. And this is absolutely true because apparently we are starting now to escape from this trap of liquidity created by the central banks. When I was a worker, I used to serve the bank, but I'm still a supporter of the banks, and I'm very furious with the attitude adopted by the central banks. Today, if you look at the financial sector, the insurance companies rely on central banks. Why? Because they have to build up assets which valued by price allow them to comply with their liabilities, with their contingent liabilities. And if you look at the banks, they rely on the central banks. On one side, they fix the monetary policy. This impacts very much the financial margin, which has deteriorated. They rely on the central bank because they are the supervisor. They can even attend board sessions without vote, but throwing their voice. And they are the regulators, because according to Pillar 2 of the European Union directives, they can fix the capital required in function of the business model or the risk profile of each bank. So this has to change. And I think we have the opportunity to hear Daniel explaining all the subtleties and nuances of this expansionary monetary policy. I don't have to add anything else. He's an extraordinary man. He will explain all that in English. And today, London is the center of all the financial centers. So he comes from the cold. So very welcome, Daniel. All the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Enrique, for this absolutely outstanding presentation. I was almost hoping that you could say that you could add a little bit more, because it was so exciting what I was hearing about what's going on with the banks, which is absolutely true. And thank you very much to the IEB. Thank you very much for everyone here for attending this afternoon to the presentation of this book, Escape from the Central Bank Trap. This is the first time in history, today, as we speak, in which central banks are printing $200 billion a month without there being any crisis, without there being any recession, without there being even deflationary risks. It's extraordinary. Because if you look at the last 650 years of history all over the world, from the moment in which Nero, the emperor, decided to be very, very intelligent, and instead of paying soldiers with silver coins, decided to add a little bit of metal to those coins in order to pay them more, and ended up almost bankrupting the empire and obviously creating hyperinflation. From that time, monetary policy has always been the driver of boom and bust cycles. Every single crisis you look at in Europe, in the world, every single crisis that you look at in history, political crisis, comes first from an extraordinary and absolutely unprecedented level of monetary expansion. Isn't it incredible? The funniest thing about it all is that we talk of monetary policy, which should be an oxymoron. Monetary movements should not be part of policy. There should not be a monetary policy. There should be monetary movements, monetary changes. But policy? Why policy? Because at some point in history, actually in every single point in history, governments give themselves the right to believe that they can change economic cycles. Not only that they can change economic cycles from the viewpoint of making some fiscal policies or changing a little bit the taxation or improving the way in which the administration is working. No. From dividing the slices of the pizza. From dividing the slices of the pizza. There's a joke in the markets that maybe some of you have read, in which Paul Krugman, the monetarist economist, goes to the pizza parlor and asks for a pizza, and the waiter says, "Mr. Krugman, how would you like your pizza? Would you like it sliced in 8 or in 4 pieces?" And he says, "Slice it in 8. I'm very hungry tonight." It's exactly the same pizza, no? But what is money? You see, this is the funniest thing that we find in our time, is that the very concept of money has been completely wiped out from our brains. You ask somebody out there, I don't even want to ask you guys because you probably will not even want to think about it, but we don't really know what money is today. There was actually a point in which if you went to and you picked a note, it said it was a promissory note. The bank promised to deliver $1. Now it's not even a promise. Now it's faith. It's become faith. Now what we have is that has always been a problem. That has always been part of the boom and bust cycles that we have created, to the point that since Bretton Woods happened, in the world, we have seen more than 150 different financial crises. And the problem is that historically, what we have done is to say, look, okay, there are some imbalances created by monetary policy. However, what we believe is that the benefits are higher than those risks that are created. But there is one thing that, like everything in history, we tend to forget, which is the law of diminishing returns. And the law of diminishing returns happens is that every time that we get out of one of these crises, we leave more indebted, we leave with lower growth, we leave with lower productivity. And those risks, therefore, create much larger imbalances. It's not that the bust cycles are a way of cleansing the economy. It's not like the bust cycles help us to redistribute the challenging factors in the economy and things become cheaper and therefore, productivity starts to grow. No. It's that we perpetuate the bubbles. We perpetuate the bubbles by constantly refinancing. And therefore, things that have happened in the past 10 years, I'm sure that in 50 or 100 years, somebody will look at our time and say, I cannot believe that these people didn't look at velocity of money. I cannot believe that these people were creating hundreds of billions of dollars of new money every year, and they weren't paying attention to the fact that the number of times that a monetary unit moves in the economy is collapsing. I cannot believe that these people thought that a financial crisis created from excess risk should be solved by creating further risk in bonds. So, if we think about the current environment is generally perceived as a benign environment. Is generally perceived as a benign environment because there is no inflation. Oh, Daniel, but why are you worried? There is no inflation. Guess what? Every single monetary crisis in history starts from the words, there is no inflation, including the Weimar Republic. Every single one. Why? Because by definition, at the beginning of monetary excess, that money, that amount of money, does not permeate to the real economy. It inflates financial assets. Where is inflation? Inflation is where the money goes. If I give you today a lot of money, you will say, oh, I'm rich. Okay, so I can do two things. I can save it, I can spend it, or I can go and waste it. Actually, you will probably do the latter. So money velocity collapses, productivity doesn't increase, and the likelihood of improving the economy doesn't get, but prices will go up. Now, if I, instead of giving you the money, I put it in the financial system to spread it through you, depending on your credit requirements, what happens? None of you would be interested in spending that money in leveraging up. Isn't it funny that in 2017, with interest rates at zero, investment is at the levels that real productive investment is at 1950s levels, and companies don't want to invest? Isn't it amazing? Are they stupid? Isn't it amazing that with interest rates at zero, citizens don't want to take more debt? You should all be asking for a loan, no? But I'm sure that one of you, at least one of you here in this audience, has recently received a call by which they were pre-given a loan, right? And you probably took that call with fear, as if I don't know, the devil was calling you. I don't want that. It's interesting because what happens, and this is what policymakers forget, is that financial repression does not generate what it intends to generate. Financial repression is not making citizens spend more, it's not making companies spend more or invest further. Financial repression is not making companies take more risk. They make you take less risk. Therefore, excess liquidity builds in short-term financial assets. Makes sense? Because if I don't believe in the price or the quantity of money, and I might not be an economist, but I certainly understand financial repression because I feel it in my pockets. I have a friend who says everything I pay goes up and everything that I earn goes down. If you do that, what happens, even if you're not a financial analyst or an economist, you're certainly going to be more prudent. But you do feel that your money is worth less and that you get less into all that money. Therefore, what you do is to put a little bit of it, not all of it, into very risky short-term financial assets. So, multiples explode, bond yields collapse. And today, as we speak, without a crisis and with inflation at 1.4%, 1.5% at the core level, at a global level, we have more than 17% of the debt of many of the biggest economies is in negative bond yields. So what we are saying to investors is two things. Either that their money in 10 years is going to be worth nothing. B, that the price and the amount of money is something that you should not believe in. You might not be an expert. You might not be somebody that's read this book. Hopefully, very few of you, especially, or at least buy it to improve money velocity. But you do feel the pinch. You see, this is what I asked in a conference one day. I said, why do Japanese citizens not consume, or at least not consume as much as economists or the government or policymakers would want them to? Why? It's a very rich economy, salaries are very high, unemployment is exceedingly low. Are they stupid? Why do they not consume more? Why do they not take more debt when interest rates have been zero bound for 2 decades? You know why? Precisely because they're not stupid. Because they are not amnesiac. Because Japanese citizens, be them economists or be them not economists, be them financial experts or be them not financial experts, know what financial repression means for their pockets. And therefore, they save more. Which in turn creates even more imbalances. So what you try to achieve with financial repression is actually not achieved. That is the reason why today, every day, as we speak today, here, and not only in this country, but in any country in the European Union, the European Central Bank is puzzled by the fact that investment is not growing as much as money supply. Is puzzled by the fact that companies are not leveraging up. And it's normal. And it is normal. But the problem that you create is that by trying desperately to force financial repression into citizens and to make them do something that they are not going to be doing, what ends up happening is that you inflate financial bubbles. And allow me to say one thing. Placing financial risk in the balance sheet of a central bank is exactly the same as placing financial risk in the balance sheet of private banks. It is exactly the same. The fact that it's in the balance sheet of central banks does not reduce the risk. It disguises it. And the reason why it disguises it is because any one of you who defends monetary policy will say, well, that's not a problem. Central bank can expand its balance sheet forever. in as much as they want. Really? Does it? We have not tested that territory. But we have tested the territory of bringing the balance sheet of a central bank to 25%, 30% of the GDP of a country. And the central bank being the number one buyer of equities, as in Japan last year, and GDP estimates coming down, not up, down. We need to pay attention to financial risk, because by paying attention only to inflation, we forget that what we are creating is a domino effect. It's like a vacuum effect. It's what you're doing is you are disguising all that risk in the balance sheet of central banks, but the fundamental question remains: who in this room would buy Spanish 10-year bonds at 1.5% yield for 10 years when the European Central Bank stops buying? Exactly. Exactly those. By the way, for the camera, 0. Not because Spain is a very, very bad country, because no one in this room or outside of this room is seeing anything else than a price inflation that is outside of fundamental. That's fine. Now, the question is, where would you start to be the secondary market that starts to buy some of those bonds? And that is a fundamental question that today is not being resolved. And the reason is that central banks, instead of analyzing a risk that they have never been able to predict, which is financial risk, that they have always underestimated, which is financial risk, what they are doing is doing it again. They are again misinterpreting and massively underestimating financial risk. It would be very easy. It would be extremely easy, exceedingly easy. In the next auction of one of the countries, the European Central Bank steps out and sees what is the secondary demand of that auction and how much do bond yields rise or go down. But they don't do it. The main reason why they don't do it is because they perceive that the risks that can be attached to creating or perpetuating a financial bubble will be offset by the benefits in the real economy. Now, if what you find is that the benefits in the real economy are much lower than what you had previously estimated, remember that with the United States printing almost $1 trillion every 18 months, estimates of GDP growth by the Federal Reserve had to be cut in half. So on one side, your estimates of growth come down. Your estimates of inflation are coming down. And on the other side, you are underestimating the financial market risk, which you have always done. So the first thing that, as a central bank, you need to put your position in is first, if I have always been unable to predict a financial crisis, I should pay a lot more attention to the risk of financial crisis, wouldn't it? By definition, if I have been completely unable to predict the housing bubble, the tech bubble, the Brazil bubble, the Russian bubble, I have been completely and utterly unable to predict the savings banks bubble in Spain, to predict any, call them, it doesn't matter. If the central bank has always been unable to predict any of those, then it should be paying not more attention, but all of its attention to financial markets. Because on the other side, at the same time, the same models that they use to predict unemployment improvement, salary improvement, growth of GDP, growth of inflation, etc., they're all failing. Now, yesterday, a few very, very important economists were asking themselves, they didn't understand, okay, why, with such low unemployment in the US, salaries, real salaries, are not going up? Why are they not going up? I mean, seriously, with 4.5% unemployment, salaries should be going up dramatically. Why are they not going up? So they look at every possible explanation except This is funny, isn't it? Every possible explanation, including magic, including magic, that is, that people actually love to work for less money, and I'm not joking. They actually enjoy the fact that they are working more hours for less real salaries, except the fact that unemployment is coming down due to an extraordinary effect coming from financial repression, and that therefore, as Hayek mentioned, what you're creating is a vacuum effect that when it stops can burst back up very, very quickly. So the main reason why I wrote this book was, well, the main reasons were three. First, there are many books about the liquidity trap. All of them are written by academics that are never looking at the risk of financial markets. Second, all of them are written by academics whose belief of what needs to be done is always that if intervention doesn't work, we need more intervention. So so if there's a liquidity trap, if you guys are not investing, if you guys are not spending, if your families are not taking more debt, obviously what we need to do is lower interest rates to negative. So it didn't work from 11 to 0. It will surely work from 0 to -3. You see, it's not that the tool didn't work. It's that you didn't. In fact, Krugman again, and I quote, that we needed to implement financial repression until investors give up. Until investors give up, and that's a quote. That means until you guys have nothing else to do but to waste your money. Which is not going to happen. And it is not going to happen. And that's why financial repression is not inflationary, it is disinflationary. Because all of the money is being used to perpetuate the overcapacity that we have created in economies that were an overcapacity that was created also from the decision to inflate real assets. Now, the second reason why I wrote this book is because there are many books that massively criticize monetary policy, okay? But all of them are written by people that believe in science fiction. That all of them, all of them are very interesting. But they're all written by people that believe in science fiction. The fact that central banks have to be closed, that governments have to stop existing, that the world needs to go back to the golden standard, and things like that. Which is fine as an intellectual concept, but to be fairly honest, is impractical. Therefore, there comes the third reason why I wrote this book. I have yet to see a single book that says, how do we get out of this massive problem without creating A, a financial crisis through a bubble bursting, B, destroying the real economy by killing the financial system. And that's what I wanted to do with this book. This is not a book about criticism. It's a book about criticism, but it's a book about solutions. It is a book about solution, and it's a book about feasible solutions, and showing that some central banks have actually been wise enough in periods in which the temptation to lower interest rates were very high. One of the examples that I give, it might not be very popular these days because of this whole thing with Russia, but the governor of the central bank of Russia was intelligent enough when oil prices started to go down not to lower interest rates. And why did she? It's very important that it's a she, because women are more intelligent than men. It's very important. Why did she not lower interest rates because oil prices were going down? Precisely because of that. Because the decision of companies to invest or not invest was not based on the fact that interest rates were at 7 or at 6 or at 5 or at 4, but based on fundamental reasons of the economy at the time. So lowering interest rates, the only thing that would have done in the Russian economy would be to generate a financial bubble, which she very, very wisely wanted to prevent. So I think that there are the central bank of Russia. At the very beginning of the QE in Europe, Mario Draghi spent every single conference, more than 60% of the time, saying to governments that they needed to implement structural reforms, that they needed to have fiscal policies aimed at growth, that they needed to let the economies breathe by lowering taxes, by cutting on wasteful spending, etc., etc., etc. Nobody listens. The only thing that we care about, or Mario Draghi, is that when he starts talking, he says, is he raising interest rates or is he lowering them? Is he lowering them? Let's buy some banks. Huh? By the way, isn't this funny? Doesn't it show you as a cause and effect? Doesn't it show everybody that if the central bank decides to delay changes in monetary policy despite fundamentals, that if the central bank decides to delay its increase of interest rates or its reduction of asset purchases, the market goes crazy? Isn't that an indication, no? Isn't that the same indication that if you put a few hundred bottles of vodka outside a school and everybody goes drunk, there's a connection? That is the problem, is that we're not paying attention to that risk. And the reason why we're not paying attention to the risk, and I think it's so important to talk about the risk of monetary policy being so aggressively expansionary in a time of no recession and no crisis, is because the next financial crisis will be found with no tools from central banks to attack it. The next financial crisis, do you really believe that if there's a financial crisis, the European Central Bank was going to solve it by lowering interest rates to -1? Do you really think that instead of printing 60 billion euros a month, it will solve it by printing 120, 300, 400? Where does that money go to? So that money will explode in some place. And it always, if you look at history, and I explain it in the book, monetary imbalances always explode. If we were completely able to monitor when, we would be not only incredibly rich, but also incredibly fortunate to escape to another country. But it's very difficult to predict when. But it's not difficult to predict what will happen. It either comes with a massive increase of unemployment from all the fake employment created by very low interest rates and very high liquidity, or it comes with a sudden burst in inflation that destroys the purchasing power of families, companies, and their ability, or it comes through the most logical, which is a crisis in the banking system. The crisis in the banking system is not going to come like the crisis of 2008, which was a crisis of asset valuation. It's going to come from the inexistence of the business. Because if you continue to lower interest rates, margins, as you very well said, Enrique, margins collapse. Not only they collapse, but banks are forced to lend at much higher risk with much lower returns. The same way as investors now in this concept that I mentioned in the book of search for yield are taking much higher risk for a lot less return. Think about it this way. Today, a high-yield bond, that high yield is the new way of talking of junk bonds. Junk bonds are things that basically are almost impossible to repay. But anyway, high yield. High yield is very diplomatic, sounds like fun. But high yield bonds today are at the lowest level ever. But repayment capacity, according to Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, is at worse levels than in 2006. So there's a gap. There's a gigantic gap. So today, if you're an investor, you are buying bonds of an African country love Africa, but you're buying bonds of an African country at the same yield that you were buying French bonds 3 years ago. Isn't that astonishing? And more importantly, that might be astonishing. The key thing is it fundamental? The key thing for us to understand is whether that is fundamental. More importantly, the second thing to understand is what happens not when central banks, because the first thing that anybody of you might say is, okay, if you create such a problem and nobody cares about the size of the balance sheet of the central bank, then they just can increase it, do they? What happens when it becomes part of the liquidity? When it becomes something, when it becomes a volume that the market simply takes for granted. It's not even thinking about stopping monetary policy or tapering. It's thinking of when the market simply cannot live without that demand. And that is a very important factor, because if you think about it, when it becomes part of the liquidity, what happens is that the wealth effect that I mentioned in the book as well, that says, hey, look, yes, we are creating inflation, financial assets, but all of you benefit. Stocks go up, so your funds go up. House prices go up, so your houses go up. So we should all be happy. Who owns stocks here? Exactly. Less than 8% of the wealth of families is in stocks in the OECD. Many people own a house, but what do they really own? They own a mortgage. Now, if the fact that that the house price goes up is not a positive for the mortgage buyer, it's true that they pay less for the mortgage, but it makes it a lot more difficult for the people that don't have access to debt to enter the property market, because your ability to buy the house is not improving. Therefore, it is not a coincidence that house prices go up in the middle of financial repression, yes, but most of the house purchases are made with cash. You see? It's not going to the people that are supposed to benefit from the wealth effect. It's going to a much different group of people. And then we talk about inequality. President Obama gave yesterday a lecture on inequality, charging $7,700 a minute. But the key thing is, what happens when it becomes part of the liquidity? What happens when the bubble that you have created is so large and there is nobody in the real economy that is actually benefiting from it? Are you going to pass the bill to the real economy? Are you going to increase taxes, reduce salaries, etc.? It's not going to be, are you going to lower interest rates? You see, we're running out of tools to manage the same problems that we have done in the past. So what we need to do is to present a different perspective. And obviously, I want you to read the book, and more importantly, I want you to buy it. So actually, I want you to buy it. I don't care if you read it. But I give solutions to that. I give solutions to that without entering into a massive financial depression, and more importantly, without making us as investors be even more addicted to monetary policy. Because there's one thing that I mentioned in the book that is incredibly dangerous. It's called buy the junk. What do you guys are here, my pupils, the people that have studied here, you've all studied markets. What do people do when interest rates are super low and liquidity is super high? You buy the worst companies you can find in the market. Please find me the junk, the absolute disaster, because those are the ones that go up the most, because those are the ones that are more leveraged to a very small change in the economy. How dangerous can that be? It is as dangerous as the fact that if a percentage as small as 6% of the economy in the US, as was the high yield market in energy, in shale, was so close to be bust that it could have had ripple effects on all the economy, multiplied tenfold, 20-fold. That was the problem of the housing bubble, if you remember. If you remember when the housing bubble burst, the analysis of consensus was very, very, very simple. Oh, Daniel, housing is only 15% of the economy. The rest is fine. No! How many times is that leveraged? And how many times is the bank that is financing that leveraged to that principle? You see, the ripple effects are much higher than what we assume in the models. The models are ridiculous. The models are so ridiculous that there's a chapter here in which I show the fallacy of the hockey stick. The fallacy of the hockey stick. Look at estimates of the large international entities, the large consensus, the large investment banks of growth. Next year, it all goes better. Next year, it all goes. So you lower this year, you lower the next, and then the next is fine. So the hockey stick always comes. Now, the problem of believing in the hockey stick is that you create expansion of multiples that is not justified by fundamentals. And when those fundamentals, instead of being something that maybe a crazy guy in London or Madrid writes a book about, or it becomes something that we guys talk in a small room like this, or that we speak in expert places, but that people really fear about, then it bursts, which is what happens with every single financial bubble. Bubbles never happen in assets that we believe to be risky. Never. The reason why bubbles happen is precisely because we believe that they are not risky. The accumulation of risk always happens in the assets that we believe to be not risky. And which are those today? Sovereign bonds. Now, the problem is that obviously government has tremendous power. Central banks have tremendous power, so they can perpetuate this for a very long time. But they need to pay attention to how to get out of it because, as Thomas Sowell said, a politician has three objectives. One is to be elected, the second one is to be re-elected, and the third one is to be named a member of the board. So the first two are very, very important, and you need to pay attention because there is a reason why we are seeing a reaction that the economists are not understanding. I remember we were in the U.S. Before the elections. We were in the U.S. watching TV. Everybody, consensus bias is another thing that I mentioned in the book. Consensus bias is super dangerous. Everybody in the financial community, everybody in the academia and in the economist community was saying, look, seriously, the economy is growing 2%. There's 4.5% unemployment. Everything is great. You get free healthcare. First time in your life. This is a slam dunk. Trump. And it's not a coincidence because the middle class, the average citizen, is not benefiting from this wealth effect that, by the way, and I adore the paper that Ben Bernanke wrote about it, doesn't exist. It is untrue. It is untrue. The wealth effect exists for those that are in the business of creating wealth effect, not in the average citizen. So we need to pay a lot of attention to this risk. My recommendation is that central banks stop justifying expansionary policies despite the fact that neither employment nor growth nor inflation are a risk anymore, and start paying real attention to the secondary market. And real attention. Not attention as in we do pay attention. They do say that, by the way. So they do say, we pay a lot of attention to the secondary market. We pay a lot of attention to the secondary market. No one has done the exercise that I just mentioned. Who buys Portuguese bonds tomorrow if the central bank stops buying? Who buys Japanese equities if the central bank is not the first buyer of Japanese equities?
what does the Central Bank of Japan do? How can somebody explain to me how does buying stakes in quoted equities in Japan improve the economy for the Japanese? Saying that buying ETFs and buying bonds creates employment and generates growth is exactly the same thing as saying that if we all start dancing, it's going to rain. It might start to rain, but it's not a cause effect. It's a coincidence. So pay a lot of attention to secondary markets. Be very, very, very concerned about the risks that we are creating without thinking, okay, let's all commit suicide because the world is going to end. Because the world is not going to end. Huh? But we need to start the dialogue and start the debate with our policymakers, with our central banks, with the community, to say, look, you cannot come to me again saying that you can print as much money you want because there is no inflation. Because there's nobody in the world that has ever left a supermarket saying, damn, the food prices are down. I can't believe this. I'm so outraged because meat is cheaper. This is outrageous. Gasoline prices are down. No one. So we need to tackle, because what we're tackling here is a way of viewing the economy that is completely wrong. It's not taken into account. Technology is not taken into account. Efficiency is not taken into account. All the improvements that are happening in the economy that are greatly disinflationary, but at the same time positively disinflationary. And we need to stop thinking about inflation as something positive, because inflation is always a monetary imbalance. And you can like to be a little bit ill and be 35 degrees, and have an aspirin. But that doesn't alter the fact that you're a little bit ill. We need to pay attention to that, because in the meantime, we're building the other risk, the financial risk. When central banks can start paying attention to secondary markets, and there are ways of doing it, there's a tailored rule, there are many, many ways of doing it, it doesn't need to be an aggressive policy. When they do, at least what we will do is to put in the market's mind the idea that this is not a free lunch. This is super important. I can't believe what I read actually yesterday in the economic papers here in Spain. The papers said, and I quote, "It is incredible that Banco Popular went bankrupt because of lack of liquidity when the European Central Bank has 1.3 trillion of excess liquidity." So this is exactly the same as saying, it is incredible that I have gone bankrupt when I can take your money and please give it to me. You see? You see the perverse incentive? So a bank that is in dire straits, that is in a very, very difficult position, should have unlimited optionality to continue to be atrociously ineffective. So that's what we need to go back to sanity. And there's a chapter called Back to Sanity, actually, that is called Going Back to Sanity. We need to come back to reality. To understand that the idea of that the Phillips curve on inflation and unemployment, that the ideas that we have talked about for so many decades in the economy are being challenged by efficiency, productivity, technology, and globalization. And that you cannot just disguise that through masses of amounts of money, because then you create a financial bubble and you create a crisis that actually hurts your citizens more than what you aim to protect. So, the final part is to talk about rebuilding the middle class. So let's stop talking about the alleged wealth effect. Let's stop talking about the J curve and what will happen in 5 years' time and this hockey stick idea. And let's think about today. Let's think about going back to sanity and putting back the idea in the economy and in the markets that money is not a decision of government, that money is a function of growth and the productivity and the goods and services that an economy produces. So I'm glad. Thank you very much for coming to this little chat. I'm really grateful that you did come with such beautiful weather out there. It is not going to start raining even if we dance, and we will not create employment by printing money. Thank you very much.
Agree that Professor Lacalle has given us a real comprehensive and illustrative explanation about what's going on. And he really shows not only that he belongs to the world of academia, he's a brilliant economist, but also he's a fund manager and corporate advisor. That means he has a market approach. One question, Professor Lacalle. You mentioned here the case of the Central Bank of Russia. Elvira, very difficult to pronounce her surname.
Yeah, exactly.
What was so special about her attitude during these last years? Because it really shocked me. And I didn't realize it was so different, her behavior, than the one applied and performed by Western European central banks, US, etc.
I think that she understood very well the challenges of entering into a financial bubble in an environment of fundamental changes in what moves the economy. So the economy of Russia, but Russia's GDP is more about, you probably don't know this, but Russia's GDP is more or less the GDP of Spain. It's a very big country, but its GDP is more or less the same as Spain. It's $1 trillion and change. She understood that if she had lowered interest rates massively, it would have created a problem in the financial system, and it would have created a problem of perverse incentives to invest in short-term financial assets that would come back to bite the economy in a very short period of time. So she understood very well the crisis of the 90s crisis, and in Russia, it's commendable to fight the powers that be in Russia. Is in Russia or anywhere else, but in Russia. So it was very intelligent of her to make not only to understand, but to make the government understand that if they lowered interest rates, they would be hooked into a bigger problem that will make them even more dependent on external financial imbalances and debt, and therefore make them not strong. They would make them not stronger, but just weaker. So I think it was very smart, because now, with all the challenges that the economy has had, with oil prices plummeting, and with the economy slowing down, and the sanctions, etc., the reality is that they, in terms of debt, they have not increased dramatically their debt, which would have been a direct impact of lowering interest rates. They would have entered into a spending spree. They're in a much stronger position, despite the fact that oil prices are nowhere close to the worst. They're actually lower than the worst case scenario that they were thinking. They were thinking $75 long term, and it's at 45. So think about this. Imagine if she had taken the decision of lowering interest rates dramatically, increasing the liquidity by increasing the central bank's balance sheet in the Russian economy, and today oil prices remain at 45. There's a gigantic financial crisis in Russia. It would have created a domino effect. So I think that she understood very well the previous crisis that they went through.
Any questions?
Do you think going back to the gold standard might be a realistic solution?
There's no need to go back to the gold standard. The golden standard is different, because I'm making a joke here. The gold standard itself is impossible to implement. Think about it. Tomorrow you say, okay, from here, 2017 to 2020, we go back to the gold standard. So total reserves of gold, the total value of the gold reserves of the world are less. I think it's less than a fifth. No, less than a 15th. I'm not sure, but I mean, multiple times lower than the GDP of countries today. So you would have a domino effect in financial markets, etc., that would create a worse situation for the real economy than the improvement that you want to achieve. So going back to the gold standard is an impossibility, but you don't need to go back to the gold standard. For example, you can have a Taylor rule by which the central bank cannot increase money supply by more than GDP growth. The real GDP growth, by the way, not nominal, because then you enter into the trap. You can also have a Taylor rule by which you say, look, if the policy is 200 basic points away from inflation, 200 in terms of interest rates, or 250 basic points away from the unemployment rate that you consider as average in a medium term, then you cannot do those things. You set yourself a number of limits. You can do that. You don't need to go back to the gold standard. You don't need to do crazy things, but you definitely need to pay attention, because there's another thing that I mentioned in the book, which is cryptocurrencies. Is that up until very recently, the way in which investors and savers defended themselves from financial repression was buying gold, physical gold, not ETFs. ETFs are the same as buying banks. Buying physical gold, buying silver, buying something tangible that would be some sort of inflation hedge or a devaluation hedge. Now that was sort of okay, but suddenly you have cryptocurrencies, and now people have currencies that are available worldwide in which supply is not dictated by a government or by a central bank, and demand is purely set by the market. Therefore, central banks don't have a monopoly of the currency manipulation that they had before. So one of the things that I believe central banks, and I say it in the book, need to pay attention to is the absolute necessity of being a world reserve currency. And that in itself is like being the gold standard. When Mick Mulvaney, when Rex Tillerson talk about a prudent monetary policy, what they're talking about is saying, look, the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. We want it to be the world's currency reserve of the world. We want that when you go to Nigeria, when you go to Kazakhstan, and you have a dollar, people will take it and give you goods and service. Because if you go with a peso boliviano, I'm sorry, with all my respect to Bolivia, they don't want it. It's very important. It's very important to be a world reserve currency. And in Europe, we're not paying attention to that. One of the things that I find exceedingly concerning is the fact that while money supply in the Eurozone is growing at 7-8% per annum, demand in international transactions for euros is coming down. That's according to the BIS. So if that happens, that is showing that the world in itself, when I decide to make commerce with somebody, is not deciding, okay, I'm a European company, you're a Chinese company, let's make transactions in euros. Give me some dollars, especially the Chinese. But so I think that this is very important. But you don't need to. You see, you don't need to go back to the gold standard. You don't need to close central banks. All of these are very aggressive things that are, I don't know, we can think about them in science fiction, but if you went back to the gold standard, if you did what Mitt Romney mentioned, remember Mitt Romney mentioned that the US would go back to the gold standard in a period of 10 years. Just make a calculation. The US debt to GDP, private plus public, exceeds 350. It's about 350%. Think about it. You completely drain the economy as it is today. No,
allow it to breathe. No, it's like having a sick person and saying, oh, you need to make a lot of exercise. Okay, you can't even walk. No? So you need to give some guidance, by the way, so that every one of us, including myself, have faith in the central bank, because that's another problem that we're having right now. Right now, if we talked about this 5 years ago, confidence in central banks was very high. They said, we believe that the economy is going to grow like this, we believe that the economy is going to do this and that, etc. It was very high. Today, a central bank issues its estimates. The first thing the market says, and the economist says, whatever, maybe. Thank you. I'll take it as some information. That is very dangerous, because if forward guidance is lost from confidence, being a reserve currency is lost from your position, then is when you create a monetary or a financial problem. And we're very, very, I wouldn't say close as in a few months, but we're very close to that.
For giving your brilliant speech. Sincerely. To hear your opinion about the policy of the Fed now. Do you think they are getting out of this?
You see, the Federal Reserve knows that the dollar is the world reserve currency. The Federal Reserve, you remember the taper tantrum, no? The Federal Reserve stops its QE program, stops buying assets, markets collapse for a short period of time, etc. But the Federal Reserve knows that when interest rates start to go up, and demand for dollars globally is going up, while supply for dollars is coming down. So therefore, they do know that the secondary market is going to be there to buy the bonds that they are not buying at some point. And still, there was a massive taper tantrum that people still remember as a crisis, as a crash. In fact, I remember that one day they called me from TV and said, can you talk about the stock market crash? And I said, what happened? And they said, it's down 3.5%. 3.5%, what are you talking? What is this? We're so addicted to the bubble that a 3.5% fall is a crash. You're joking, no? So, but they do monitor that. And one thing that happens is that if you remember the book I mentioned, when QE starts, the president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, says this is a monetary tsunami, because they were receiving, obviously, so many dollars are created. Those dollars, where do they go? They go to emerging markets looking for growth, looking for some inflation, so those economies suddenly receive this massive amount of dollars that are short-term dollars, that they invest in long-term assets in local currency. Think about this. Think about this. So, when the Federal Reserve stops doing that, what happens? That those economies need to get a lot more dollars to pay the debts that they have incurred, because their currencies fall. Their currencies are not global reserve. So therefore, you create what is called a sudden stop. Involuntarily, or I don't know, let's hope involuntarily, but you create a sudden stop, which is that the flow of capital into emerging markets goes exactly the other way around from emerging markets into the US. That is fine for the US because it's the world reserve. Now, that is not the same for the rest. And you can say, we don't agree with the dollarization of the world. That's fine, that's a division of the world. Now, but think about it, what they're doing today. Today, they've increased rates by 0.25%. They've increased rates by 0.25%, yet inflation is at 2%, 2 and change percent. Inflation is at 2 and change percent. So they are way behind the curve. Federal Reserve is not
normalizing monetary policy is keeping a very, very, very dovish policy, because it is hugely behind the curve. It's around 250, now 225 basic points behind the curve. And more importantly, is that they are unable to get enough tools to follow the same policy if the economy enters into a recession, which we don't know. It doesn't look like it, but if it does, they have a problem. Because, you see, it's not just that you say, okay, who cares, 0.25, 0.50, it's not that. It's that, what do you do if now we have a problem? That is, you can't do anything. Would they imagine that tomorrow the US growth starts to plummet, unemployment starts to go up, etc., etc., etc. What does the Federal Reserve do? Imagine that they launch QE4. What do you, and be serious, what do you guys do in this room if they launch QE4? After 4.7 trillion of expansion of their balance sheet? We run away. That would be a very, very dangerous message to market. You see, you not only are creating a very dangerous situation in financial markets, you also, it is very dangerous if you are unable to have a normalized monetary policy in an environment in which you should have it more than normalized. What are they expecting? Unemployment to go to zero? Okay. Donald Trump says that unemployment is not 4.5%. That might be the case. That might explain why real salaries are not going up. Because unemployment is not changing. Right? So, you see what I mean? Is that you start to put into the market and into market practitioners the view that you know something that we don't know. We use official data, we use growth, we use all these macro indicators, and those all tell me that you should increase rates and lower your balance sheet. But you have decided to increase rate. Did they decide to reduce the balance sheet by 600 billion? They didn't. They decided not to do it. You see that? They did not. You see, they
some details and so on.
They postponed it.
Not postponed, but they disclosed some details, but they haven't implemented it.
But they haven't implemented it, exactly. I mean, like, my very, very good friend Keith McCullough, who's been so kind to make a recommendation on the book, nailed it with this. He said, there is no way they are going to be lowering the balance sheet in this environment. Why? And growth, unemployment, inflation, job salaries, capex, all those things should point you to do it, yet you don't do it. So you give the impression that something is not going well. That's my problem. This is and the chapter on forward guidance and the chapter on credibility of the central banks. I would. This book has been sent to all of them, by the way, but I don't know if they're going to read it. But I would definitely implore them to read that chapter. Forget about everything else. Forget about what I believe. Forget about you believe. Forget about what everybody else believes. But please think about credibility, because if they lose credibility, then it's all gone. See, it's the thin line between hope and disaster. So that's my concern. The Fed should be a lot more aggressive in its discipline. Yes?
I can see you.
I can see you. That's the
you mentioned also a very controversial topic, which is income inequality. I really want to get your opinion on this, because we have the United States, which is one of the most developed economies, and yet we see that it's one of the most countries with the highest levels of income inequality, especially since the 1970s, which is when the financial sector started to be deregulated. So in that sense, I was thinking, how is it possible that the Fed or the ECB is printing money out of thin air, and it's not ending up in the hands of the people that needs this money? I want to know your personal opinion on this, and Like, to know to what extent do you think that the Fed and the ECB are responsible for increasing income inequality that we see in the world right now, especially in developed economies such as the United States?
I'm going to start by saying no one has ever died from inequality. But from poverty, yes. So we should care about poverty, not inequality. I don't have a problem with the fact that Enrique makes a lot of money, and I'm very, very happy that he does. I don't have a problem with that. But let me point out this issue of inequality. You cannot have policies that inevitably increase inequality because they are a perverse incentive that helps the indebted and takes from the saver. In the last 10 years, the United States has had the largest transfer of wealth from savers to government seen in history. $10 trillion. So you cannot have that and think that it's not going to have consequences. Now, I'm going to give you all of the picture. Okay, the picture from, I remember Mr. Bernanke, who I had the pleasure to speak with a few times, and we actually worked in the same firm for a short period of time. Mr. Bernanke used to say, look, central banks are responsible for monetary policy, not for fiscal policy. So, in his defense, what he says, look, we provide the tools for the government to implement fiscal policies that will improve wealth, jobs, salaries, and so it's for the government. The government cannot sit back and say, which is what happens in the European Union, for example, is sit back and say, oh, monetary policy is expensive, but monetary policy is expensive, therefore what we're going to be doing is nothing. No, that generates a problem. So that's the view from the central bank. He says, look, we provide monetary policy, not fiscal policy. That's the job of the government, and governments should have been more active at fiscal policies. There is a problem. What do you consider to be being active from a fiscal stance? We move over to Larry Summers, and what is it? Spending on white elephants, public spending, infrastructure, airports that go to nowhere, and things like this, etc., which don't improve equality. Actually, they reduce the opportunities for the middle class, because who receives the burden of those taxes, of those increases in taxes? The middle class, always. So inevitably, that is something that is going to happen. Now, are governments responsible for, are central banks responsible for income inequality? No, income inequality is a consequence. Okay? Now, we need to understand whether income inequality is a good thing or is a bad thing. Because sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. If you and I have the same opportunities and he makes a lot more money than I, welcome inequality. I like that inequality. If you guys make more money because you were better in the masters, or you fantastic. That's not a problem with me. I don't have a problem. Now, the problem is when it's a perverse incentive. The problem is when that income inequality comes because the indebted have access to more debt at cheaper levels, and the inefficient have access to more subsidies that are paid by the efficient and the savers. You see? And that is a problem. Because that is what creates the response that we're seeing globally. With Brexit, with Trump, with this, with that. People might not understand it. They're not talking about it. They don't even talk about inequality. They see it, they feel it in their pockets. So the point that I'm trying to make is we should not care about inequality as long as it's fair. We should care about perverse incentives. And that's the problem that is created by perpetuating a monetary policy that does this. Now, what you imply is that because that happens, because that imbalance in monetary policy happens and is creating an excessive amount of wealth in a very small percentage of the population, is that we should do the same lunacy, but with everybody. No? What you're implying is what some people are now calling the people's QE, which is don't create money for the banks, create it for the people. Huh?
That is called Argentina and Venezuela. And it's not even a debate. It's a fact. Because it is true that monetary policy, the transmission mechanism of monetary policy that central banks have, does create those imbalances. But at least it has some checks and balances. So, for example, today the European Central Bank prints 60 billion a month, okay, but it has 1.3 trillion of excess liquidity. So that excess liquidity has not been deployed into hyperinflation. The problem of doing it the other way around is that you immediately create hyperinflation, and the people that you want to protect, you actually empower. Which is what, by the way, you reduce. You know which country reduced the most inequality in the last 15 years? Venezuela, exactly, making everybody poor. Fantastic. It's a great result. Because that's what you do. Think about it this way. We are the world. We are the children. We are the world. And I decide to give every one of you €1,000 or $1,000. Okay? What happens? Let's be extremely optimistic. Half of you will invest it. 25% of you will save it. And 25% of you will waste it, will spend it, will go party tonight, this evening. Okay, what happens tomorrow? This 50% has already invested. Okay, what are they going to do? They're going to join the party. They're going to join the ones that spend. Second, the ones that save, they say, well, it's coming tomorrow. What happens is that in a very, very, very short period of time, what is allegedly a policy that is going to create some level of multiplier effect creates a division effect. Because when everybody decides to go partying, what happens is that there's no party. Because what you have, your €1,000 of that day are worth nothing. I always bring with me, I didn't bring it today, my $1 trillion note. My $1 trillion note is a gem. I present it everywhere and I say, this is $1 trillion note. Who gives me $1 trillion? I don't care. Give me $500 billion. I'm happy with that. 50%. No one. Why? Because it's worth nothing. The only reason why money is worth something is because we all agree that it's worth something. The moment that we believe that it's worth nothing, it is worth nothing. Even if the government decides that it's not the case.
Thank you for sharing your views with us. I just had a question on investment strategies. How do investors, with a fundamental view, with an active style of investing, generate outcomes in this environment?
Exactly. It is very difficult, isn't it? Because one thing that you have seen, that is not a coincidence, is that passive strategies have taken over all over the world. Why? Obviously. Why would you need to be an active manager if money is almost given to you for free in the markets by monetary policy? Therefore, passive management becomes the norm. But that creates in itself a problem. Okay? So how do you do it? Well, first, one thing is to be worried, even disagree with policy, and also to be aware of the risks. And another completely different thing is not to manage yourself within that. When you drive a car, you're not only driving a car based on the fact of your fundamental analysis of how you drive the car and the car that you're driving, but seeing the lunatics on one side or the other and the crazy guy that's coming in front of you and the red light, you're looking at the whole landscape. You need to look at the whole landscape. So the investors, what they need to do is understand the risk, but at the same time not say, look, because there's risk, I'm not going to do anything. It's like you went in that car and decided not to drive because there are other drivers. So what investors need to do to create alpha is to understand that policy without entering into unnecessary risk constantly. That is not easy. That's why, thankfully, they pay you more than to a nuclear scientist. But it's not easy. But you have to do it. It's the same way as saying, look, I'm not going to surf because there's a wave and it crashes and then I'm going to fall. No, you learn to surf. See, like the Beach Boys used to say, ride a wave and you feel on top of the world. Ride a wave and you feel on top of the world. But then you have to come down. You have to understand those risks, but not deny the fact that they exist, and not take advantage of them while they exist. Yeah.
And also related to this, and related to the previous question on the Fed policy and monetary policy, what are your views? Do you have any views on globalization of monetary policies by central banks in different countries? What I mean is, the Fed is well behind the curve, but they have to measure their steps relative to other central banks, don't they?
Yes, they do actually.
How does it affect your investment?
They do, don't they? They do actually. No, one of the things that central banks do is that they monitor what other central banks are doing, and they look at it with, I wouldn't say with a global perspective, because they're very local, and the Fed, and I know hundreds of people that have worked in the Fed. Fed looks at the United States. Worried about China, they say it in the conference call, but to be very honest, they're not worried about China, they're not worried about Europe, they're worried about the United States, and they should. Okay, by the way. But they do monitor global imbalances of that nature. Now the problem is that the way in which they monitor them is not from the perspective of normalization, it's from the perspective of expansion. Yeah. So, I don't know if I made myself clear, but how do they look at it? For example, yesterday, when a friend of mine was saying, oh, look at this, I mean, the ECB is printing 60 billion a month, Japan is printing 70 billion a month, the UK is printing another 60 billion a month, and the Fed is behind. Behind what? Is it a race to disaster? You see, instead of looking at it from, you see, be careful because of what's happening in the United States and learn from it. Japan, Europe, the ECB, the Bank of England. Bank of England, seriously, I mean, the Bank of England, inflation in the UK is at 2.9% and the 10-year bond is at 1.2%. What the hell are you talking about? You see? So, instead of looking at it from the perspective of risks, they're looking at it from the perspective of the race of who drinks milk, and I'm really worried about that.
Yeah, so in your view, this divergence between the Fed and the ECB, Europe worse off.
Worse off to what?
Compared to Europe.
Compared to what?
The US.
In what?
Monetary policy.
Relative to the okay, let me rephrase this. So what you're saying is that the fact that the European Union is continuing with its QE puts it in a disadvantage relative to the United States.
Makes the situation worse for Europe. Now that the US doing the opposite.
It makes it more risky. It does make it more risky. Think about it. Does anyone really think that the Portuguese, Greek, the Spanish economy are going to do significantly worse if bond yields, instead of being at 1.5, were at 1.7 or 2? But at the same time, the fact that the ECB maintains the QE at these levels, despite the fact that the European Union is growing more than the UK and the US, despite the fact that unemployment is lower in every single country, despite the fact that inflation is back, what is that doing? You read it every day in the newspapers, in the debates of politicians. We should spend more. We have to spend more. We have to spend more because interest rates are low. We have saved 20 billion in interest payments. Therefore, we can increase the deficit. We have the right to increase the deficit. You see? It gives the idea that you should go back to the mistakes that you made in the past. That is the risk. Right? Because in the US, there's a big difference between, this is an important factor, between the US and the UK and the European Union. There's a huge difference. Huge difference. And now that there's so much concentration in the banks, much more important. In the US, banks finance less than 20% of the real economy. In the European Union, more than 80%. So if there's a financial crisis, unlike what we believed in 2008, you guys were very young, you guys didn't even exist, some of you. Right? In 2008, the European Union thought that it was completely safe from everything. Yeah, we have the most regulation, because you talked about regulation, deregulation, somebody out there, he left. He left to buy some bitcoins. We had the most regulated banks in the world. We had the best regulation. We were over-regulated and everything was so well done. And it was a problem of the US. And we've had a longer, deeper, and more aggressive recession in the United States. That the 80% versus 20% is a very important factor. Now imagine, now that instead of having, 27, 30 banks in a country, you have 4 or 5. What happens? It gets even more acute. So that is the risk, if I may.
Well, do you think that it makes sense for a central bank to try to create their own cryptocurrency?
Well, that's like saying, would it make sense for a thief to create its own police? It doesn't make any sense. No, what I'm saying is that it's the central bank. No, it's not a good example. I'm not saying that the central bank is a thief, but or that the cryptocurrency is. But what I am saying is, why would a central bank create a cryptocurrency whose main element is the fact that supply of the currency is not dictated by a central bank? You see? The role of the central bank, the reason why a central bank defends its position is because it says that there are benefits for the economy of increasing and reducing money supply, increasing and reducing interest rates. Why would you create a cryptocurrency in which you cannot do either of those things? It would make no sense. I don't see it. No. I mean, they can try, just for fun, but I don't understand why. I don't understand who would buy it. Oh, a cryptocurrency created by the Central Bank of Argentina. Oh, let's buy it. No? Yeah, I'm sure it will do better than the peso. I'm not entirely sure. No? So one last question, if there's anybody else, or yes.
As portfolio manager with this scenario, which is your asset allocation nowadays?
Okay. With
Do you
this.
own any banks?
Sorry?
Do you own any banks?
I don't own banks, but I never. I never invest in banks. But I tell you why. I don't invest in things that I don't understand. I'm not saying. I don't understand the equity valuation of a bank. And the more the people try to explain them to me, I have some colleagues here and there, I say, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Because I want to invest in an asset in which at least I have some, more than faith between assets and liabilities. So what happens with a bank? You're seeing it today with the crisis of Popular. People say, well, how can Popular go bust if 3 months ago it was completely solvent? Because the asset valuation of a bank goes down so quickly and the liquidity dries up so rapidly. I don't understand it. I don't have the ability to understand. Some people are great. Huh? I have a good friend that runs a financial-only asset manager. And the guy says, you don't buy banks, you rent them. I understand. Because what he does is he buys in very, very short periods of time and sells in very short periods of time. But the concept of long-term strategy, I'm a long-term investor. Long-term strategy in banks to me is very, very complicated. Very complicated to understand. And I don't understand it, I don't invest in it. Nothing bad. Love banks, but I don't understand it, so I don't invest in it. Where is my asset allocation? My asset allocation is in equities, which provide a much lower risk than bonds in this financial repression environment, in my opinion, but in equities that are outside of the cycle that is dictated by inflation. Therefore, I don't have assets that need inflation for its multiples to remain. I have a portfolio, I think it's pretty well known, it's pretty public, it is not very politically correct, but I have defense companies, tobacco companies, and things like this. I mean, they're not very, but we also have a few water, so we have companies in which we don't need inflation or low interest rates. So when interest rates go up, guess what happens to those companies? They go up. Why do they go up? Because their return on invested capital is 20 times their cost of capital. So that's my asset allocation. But there's a chapter here in which I talk about asset allocation in the escape from the central bank trap. Very good. But thank you so much.